Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Lake Orion Sports Update. I'm Kevin McCormick. We've got all the latest news in hockey, basketball, powerlifting, and so much more, all coming up at you right now. The Lake Orion hockey team continues to cruise along in the second half of the regular season. On January 17th, the Dragons traveled for an away game against Farmington United. Lake Orion seized control of the game quickly and kept up the pressure for the entire match, winning with a whopping final score of 10-1. TJ Hirschfield, Thomas Reith, and Lucas Barber were the leading scorers for the Dragons, goals each. Teammates Kate Manzo, Jason Bassler, Gabe Podick, and Ryan Stockwell each contributed a goal toward the final score. On Saturday, January 20th, the Dragons hit the road once again, this time for the OAA Metro Showcase. Lake Orion's opponent for the showcase was the Dearborn Divine Child Falcons. Both teams made it on the scoreboard in the first period. Cade Manzo scored for Lake Orion with only 2 minutes remaining in the first. The Falcons increased their output in the second and scored 2 more goals. Manzo scored another goal late and cut the Dearborn lead down to 1. As the Dragons went into the third period trying to get ahead of the Falcons, Jacob Helzer scored a Lake Orion goal at the 11-minute mark and was assisted by TJ Hirschfield and Jared Strauss. Unfortunately for the Dragons, Dearborn broke the tie and won the game with a final score of 4-3. After their loss the previous week, the Dragons were expecting a win as they hosted a home game against the Stony Creek Cougars. The game was slow to start. Both teams were scoreless until there were only 3 minutes remaining in the first period. Thomas Reith, with the help of Mitchell Burney and Joey DePry, scored the first Lake Orion goal of the night. 2 minutes later, TJ Hirschfield added his own goal, giving Lake Orion a 2-zip lead over the Cougars going into the second. The Dragons' offensive pressure carried over into the next period. At 14:59 in the second, Gabe Podick scored a power play goal. He was assisted by Lucas Barber and TJ Hirschfield. 8 minutes later, the Dragons were on a power play, and Gabe Podick found a scoring opportunity. Then, with 2:25 remaining in the second, Thomas Reith was able to earn his own power play goal, taking the Dragons to a 5-zip lead. In the final period of the game, the Cougars forced their way past the strong Lake Orion defense for their first goal of the night, but they were unable to score again, and the Dragons took the win 5-1. On Saturday, January 27th, Lake Orion held a home game at the Detroit Skating Club against Berkeley. The first period had very little action, and the first 14 minutes flew by without a score by either team. Lake Orion's Jacob Helzer changed that at the 2:21 mark with an even strength goal. Kurt Bedra and TJ Hirschfield assisted with the goal. Moments later, Berkeley received a penalty, setting the Dragons up with a power play. Helzer capitalized on the opportunity and earned a power play goal with only 3 seconds left on the clock, sending Lake Orion into the second period with a 2-0 lead. At the 10:25 mark of the second, Gabe Podick, with the help of Cade Manzo and Connor Graham, scored the third goal for Lake Orion, and at about 2 minutes later, TJ Hirschfield added another goal to the Lake Orion lead. He was assisted by Jacob Helzer and Eric Gonda. Berkeley could not break past the Lake Orion defenses, and the Dragons kept their 4-zip lead going into the third. At the very beginning of the period, Connor Graham scored Lake Orion's 5th goal with some help from Gabe Podick and Cade Manzo. Jacob Helzer scored his 3rd goal of the night, earning himself a hat trick with just over 9 minutes remaining in regulation. The Dragons' offense did not waver. At 1:24, Eric Gonda took advantage of a power play for his first goal of the night. Seconds later, Mitchell Burney finished off the night with one final goal, leading to a Lake Orion 8-0 victory. The success over the last couple of weeks shot Lake Orion up to the number 2 spot in the OAA Red Division. The Dragons have 15 points, a 7-1 Red record, and a 12-5-1 overall record. Just above the Dragons is Troy with 16 points. Rochester Stony Creek sits in 3rd with 12 points. The girls varsity basketball team continued their season with a home game against rival team, the Oxford Wildcats. It was extremely close, but sadly for the Dragons, Oxford pulled ahead and won the game 37-35. Sophie Wyborski was the leading scorer for the Dragons with 15 points. She was followed by Sydney Stringer, who had 11. The following Thursday, Lake Orion hosted another home game, this time against the Southfield A&T Warriors. Southfield gained an early lead in the first quarter, going up by 5 points over the Dragons. In the second quarter, Lake Orion chipped away at the Warriors' lead, making the score 16-14. Both teams came back after halftime, hoping to build a strong lead. The score remained very close, but the Warriors pulled ahead 29-25. The Dragons lost traction in the fourth quarter of the game, and Southfield outscored the Lady Dragons by 8 points. The Warriors walked away with a 46-32 victory against the relentless Lake Orion. Sydney Stringer was the lead scorer for the Dragons. She had 13, including 3 three-pointers. Teammate Shannon Falter, she put in 11 points and nailed 6 of her 7 free throws. Lake Orion hosted an important home game against the Stony Creek Cougars on January 23rd. It was a low-scoring but close game. The Cougars outscored Lake Orion and were ahead 9-7 after the first half of play. Stony Creek continued to play offensively in the second half, and the Dragons, playing with a depleted roster due to key player injuries, couldn't hold off Stony Creek, who won with a final score of 26-15. With the last couple of games going poorly for the Dragons, Lake Orion went into the home game against North Farmington hoping to break the losing streak. The teams were tied at 7 after the first quarter. The Raiders stepped up their defense in the second and scored 9 points while preventing any Lake Orion points. North Farmington continued to dominate the game in the third quarter, outscoring Lake Orion by 7 and keeping the defense in check. The Dragons tried to come back in the fourth quarter, scoring 17 points, but the Raiders were able to score 13 points of their own and took the win 41-29. The loss leaves the Dragons with a 3-10 overall record and an 0-5 red record. The boys varsity basketball team were also busy the last couple of weeks. On January 16th, the Ferndale Eagles landed at the Lake Orion Fieldhouse for a game against the Dragons. The Dragons quickly took the lead and scored the first 8 points of the game. The Eagles dug their heels in and got on the scoreboard, but Lake Orion still ended the first quarter with a 6-point lead. In the second quarter, the Eagles tightened up their defense and outscored the Dragons by 7, making the score 26-25 going in at the half. After halftime, Lake Orion's gameplay was more intense and calculated, but the Eagles didn't buckle under the pressure. With less than a minute in the game, Lake Orion was down by 6 points, but the Dragons clawed their way back up to a tie. Drew Kane was fouled, and although he missed his first free throw, he nailed the second one and pushed the Dragons to a 68-67 victory. Lake Orion sophomore Jack Cummins led the way with the Dragons with 18 points. Jamie Lewis was right behind him with 17. On January 19th, the Dragons hit the road for an away game against the Farmington Hills Harrison Hawks. The Dragons set the tone of the game early by outscoring the Hawks in the first quarter. That theme continued through the remainder of the game. Lake Orion outscoring Harrison in every quarter. The Dragons walked away with a 69-42 victory. The Lake Orion team was firing on all cylinders, with 10 Dragon players adding points to the final score, 3 of which were in double digits. Next up for the Dragons was an away game against the Berkeley Bears on January 25th. Going into the game, Berkeley had a commanding 10-1 record. The Dragons got right to work and took a powerful 22-point lead in the first quarter. Lake Orion continued outscoring the Bears during the next 2 quarters, and in the fourth quarter of the game, the Bears outscored the Dragons by 4, but it wasn't even close as Lake Orion took the 67-45 victory. The win leaves Lake Orion with a 9-2 overall record and a 5-2 OAA Blue record. The Dragon powerlifting team made a strong showing at the recent North Branch Regional Invitational. The girls varsity team took second place overall, with several female Lake Orion lifters performing well in their weight classes. In the 165-pound class, Lake Orion's Chelsea Steima took first with a total weight of 700 pounds. In the 198 weight class, Jessica Fox took first place, and in a sweep of the 181-pound class, Susie Bilecki took first, Kaylee Kanice took second, and third place was earned by Lexi Denofrio. On the men's side, the Dragons took first place with a 2-point margin, 98-96 over the lifter from Crosswell, Lexington. Several Lake Orion lifters placed first in their weight classes. Alan McMillan took first in the 114-pound class, while Jim Cybor in the 155-pound class and Noah Nunn in the 181-pound category each took first place. In the 145-pound weight class, Nick Powell took second place with 900 total pounds lifted, while Kevin McCormick Jr. was in 13th place. That wraps up this episode of the Lake Orion Sports Update. Tune in next time for more winter sports coverage. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.